Namaste, hello, and greetings. My name is Dr. Sushma Taylor. I'm the Executive Director of Centerpoint Incorporated in California, United States. I'm also the President of the World Federation of Therapeutic Communities. My co-facilitator for the training is Mr. Sandeep Varma, the Chief Executive of the program Staying Out in New York. We are delighted to be here in India to provide training for Indian participants at the special request of Dr. Rajesh Kumar, the Executive Director of SPYM. We're really grateful to Dr. Kumar for thinking of us for this training. The World Federation of Therapeutic Communities is a multi-nation member organization. Our members represent treatment and prevention and education programs in over 70 countries. Our members hail from the United States, Canada, Mexico, Latin America, South America, Europe, Asia, Africa, and of course, Australia. Therefore, the continents are well represented. The training modules that we have been privileged to provide have been developed over the course of many decades by many pioneers, researchers, practitioners who have helped to create the evolution of the therapeutic community model that exists today. We in the World Federation of Therapeutic Communities are very passionate about the work that we do, and we believe that the therapeutic community model works really well in many diverse cultures, in diverse geographic regions, and also embraces different socioeconomic groups and also sociocultural groups, and we believe that is really critical to doing the kind of work that we do. And we believe that addiction treatment is work of the heart. So I want to once again thank Dr. Kumar for thinking of us, and also to let everyone know that we are so excited that the World Federation of Therapeutic Communities can partner with an eminent organization such as SPYM. Our training modules have been segregated into two or three different categories. The first category is the history of therapeutic communities, how they evolved, from whence they evolved, and the pioneers that helped shape the therapeutic community methodology. We also have a training module on morning meeting and how to create, to hold, convene, and to facilitate a morning meeting, which is an essential element of therapeutic communities. Another one of our training modules is that of special populations, and in particular, adolescents and young children. We also have a module on the essential elements of therapeutic communities. What are the core programs and interventions that actually create the therapeutic aspect of therapeutic communities? And finally, our last module was the evolution of therapeutic communities from their humble beginnings to their current robust, well-researched, well-documented, and well-practiced modality that it is today. Well, this would be a good idea for us to talk about the nexus between TCs and AA, Have you pay attention to this chart on recovery. And when we look at 1905, and we're talking about Settlement House, well, Settlement House was Frank Buckman, who was the later in charge of the Oxford group that we talked about this morning. We then took a look at how the Settlement House concept became the Oxford group, and that is from 1909 to 1926. Well, then in 1934, we had the meeting of Bill Wilson and Bob Smith. Do you all know who Bill Wilson and Bob Smith are? Okay. Anybody not know these two people?
I don't know them.
Okay, well, let's give you an introduction. Two individuals with a common problem with alcohol met and started to talk to one another. And they met in Akron, Ohio in 1935. Okay? One was a physician, one was a stockbroker. And they decided that one of the ways that they could stay sober was to talk to each other and share their feelings, their thoughts, emotions. They went on to create the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. Okay? Got it? Okay. So then when you take a look at 1936, the big book was published. And then when you move to 1958, and I talked to you about this earlier, Synanon. Okay? Well, then between 1960 and 1970, there were a lot of therapeutic communities that emerged throughout the world, but particularly in the United States. And then when you look at 1972, we had national and international therapeutic communities. So the model, while the English model was a little slower to take off through other parts of Europe, I'm talking about Dr. Jones's model. The concept-based therapeutic communities from the Synanon model and applied to drug treatment in the 70s certainly started to take off. And we had certain programs, you may have heard of them, Daytop, Phoenix House. They all were like, incubators of other therapeutic communities that emerged throughout the United States and then internationally. So as Seep said, there's about 70 plus countries that currently operate a form of therapeutic community, not a form of torture center, okay? So I'm going to say that. Although there are folks in parts of Asia, not just India, and parts of Latin America that have the same punitive ideologies and call it a therapeutic community. So, but in any case, from 1972 to present, there have been a lot of adaptations to the model. We'll talk about adaptations tomorrow when we talk about how things have evolved. Now, my friend George DeLeon, whose book Seep was referencing, he and I have one fundamental disagreement that we do regularly when we speak together on the same platform. He always likes to call them modified therapeutic communities. And I take issue with that because I told him that in the early days, therapeutic communities were not developed for women. They were developed for men by men. It was not until the late 80s when pioneers had gone to our National Institutes of Health and talked about gender-specific treatment and the need for women's treatment to be different, gender-based, and not with a male approach. I was fortunate enough to be part of that core group of women that led that movement to look at specific services tailored for women, run by women, with etiology that dealt with gender issues. So, also, and though at that time we really didn't have treatment programs for adolescents. So those two particular programs did not evolve until the late 80s. Do you agree with me?
Yeah.
Yeah. So those are some of the adaptations. Now let's talk about the common features between AA and TCs. Well, they both engage in self-help. They engage in helping one another. They both talk about role modeling. And they also operate in a group format. Whereas AA's group format is a person shares and there is no feedback. In TCs, there is definitely sharing and feedback. So there's a bi-directional communication process. The explicit goal of AA is to maintain sobriety. The explicit goal of a TC is psychological and lifestyle change, which requires sobriety, underlined. So those are the common themes. If you take a look at the early prototypes for addiction-based TCs, you can align steps 1 to 3 and think about, in a TC, that's an early phase recovery. That's when we want to break the denial and also engage folks in change and pro-social change. And if you take a look at the first 3 steps in AA/NA literature, that's when they're giving in to the disease and, looking at ways of getting clean and sober. When you take a look at steps 4 to 9, both if you're in the therapeutic community model and AA, we're talking about analyzing oneself, one's skills, limitations, the places where we need to change. They share their personal stories with one another. Obviously, the TC's residents do that, and so do people in AA/NA. Now, this making amends. Now, while the language comes from AA and NA, if you look at the TC literature, it's also to, as Seep said earlier, right living and do no wrong. 2 issues there, very similar. And then, of course, the steps 4 to 9 are more in the middle phases of a TC, and this is also a period where we require intense self-examination, personal disclosure, and socialization. It's not really so much compensation, it's like regrets. What regrets have we had? What did we do wrong? And also, how can we make sure that we don't make the wrong decisions in the future? Some people in the drug world, they say stinking thinking, right? And it's like, and what made you choose the drug over, say, your parents? Or, there are some folks who actually stole from their own parents. We know about that, do we not? Okay, so when we're thinking about, it's not only making amends, but also going into this personal disclosure of what decisions did we make that were the wrong decisions, and who did we hurt? Usually it's always it's a drug-seeking behavior. So the choices were very simple: to use or not to use. What did they choose? They chose to use. Okay. So, and along the way, of course, we always say that in addiction, there are hostages that are taken. We know that because those folks who are having a problem with addiction, they're not really thinking about others in their social sphere. No, they don't think very much about their parents or their grandparents or friends. Okay, and then start taking it out on their kids. Yeah, there's some real fundamental problems there. Anyway, so then when we take a look at steps 10 to 12, this is really like a continued personal honesty and also seeking ways to sustain recovery, to sustain the right living behavior attributes that have been learned in the TC, and how can that continue once they leave. And then, of course, this is the maturation that's expected in what we call the pre-community stage. We call it re-entry phase, but it's also pre-discharge phase. So he actually has to sit down and think about what he's done and the consequences of it, and put it aside and say, one of these days you may read this letter to your mother. Maybe not today, but maybe one of these days you will.
See, one of the things we said before is that change is incremental, right?
Yes.
So if you have a lofty goal that you can't achieve, you as the clinical counselor have to develop some stops along the way to move the person there, and I think that's what Dr. Taylor is suggesting, right? So if you can't get the big everything you want, try to come up with a path to work your way there.
What
right?
you were asking for was the ideal, but your participant wasn't ready. So you need to take them in incremental steps.
In a meeting as to how you identify yourself, right? And in a TC, I was saying to you earlier that you typically have a specific greeting for people. Right, okay, so there's a similarity, right? So there's group norms that are established in terms of how you greet people, how you say goodbye, how do you end the meeting, right?
Yeah.
The meetings are ended very similarly throughout the world.
Absolutely.
The serenity prayer.
Right.
Okay. So what Seep is saying is there's a protocol that's established with AA and NA. And the rules of the behavior are well established and well known and well maintained. That's similar in a therapeutic community. The rules of behavior are established and well known. You start the group on time, you usually take roll call, and then you end the group on time. And it just depends on the theme of the group as to what.
And when you have such a strong norm that's set, right? Nobody goes to the NA meeting and doesn't introduce themselves that way, right?
No.
It doesn't happen, right? Why? Because there's such a strong expectation, right? So then you start to see that the power of the group and that norm that's set starts to take over, right? And so the same is true in the TC program. If you have the norm and the expectation that's set, whether it's with the greeting or better yet, it's with behavior or how you act and function in the community, that becomes the norm that people subscribe to. So somebody said, well, how do you get people to do it? Well, the standard is, how do you get people in AA to say, hey, I'm SEEP, I'm an addict? And everybody says, good evening, SEEP, right? Is that generally what happens, right?
That's the response.
So there's a norm that, how do you get people to do it, right? It's something that happens through the power of the group. In our discussion about TC programs, as we said, treatment is an episode, right? That has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And AA is an ongoing process, right? We also said that TC programs are optimistic about an individual's ability to change, right? And that a TC believes that who can change?
Anyone
Anyone,
can change.
right? But AA and NA in terms of tradition say that some people are what? If you're familiar, you mentioned it before that there's written traditions, right?
Traditions.
And some of those traditions, or one of them says that there are some people among us who are constitutionally incapable of changing, right?
Yes.
That's one of the traditions. So AA and NA is saying, hey, listen, some people are hopeless. Okay, that's just the way that those traditions are written. And a TC process is saying the contrary. So I want to also just highlight, as we're highlighting similarities, highlight that there are differences, and those differences are very pronounced, which make us to, clearly understand that there's a difference between AA and NA and a self-help ongoing support process and a treatment episode, which may have similarities in terms of peer support, but has some very, very fundamental and profound differences. As Dr. Taylor said in one or two slides ago, have sobriety as a primary goal, right? All right, and
primary goal.
it is a goal, though, right? It's one of the goals, right? Because people identify themselves by how long they have been clean, right? That's a main aspect of the program, right? And you get rewards and you get recognitions. I've been in a 1 year clean, 5 year coin, 10-year coin. You speak at meetings. You have a home group. You're recognized. You get applause, right? These are all parts of AA and NA. Whereas in terms of a TC goal, first of all, one is treatment and one is support, right? But you have, as a TC goal, there is a explicit psychological lifestyle change that's required. It's totally different. Has anybody heard of the term dry drunk?
In a TC, there is feedback from your peers.
Yes, feedback.
That feedback from your peers is very essential, because they're the ones who are actually giving you support or challenging you and saying, wait a minute, you didn't do this very well. This chore you didn't accomplish very well today. So that ongoing feedback process is very important. Now, we are not trying to say that AA and NA, should not be incorporated. In fact, in my program, we incorporate the first 3 steps as a part of the program. But after that, we suggest that be used as a recovery maintenance support system once they've left the TC. Okay? That's how we've incorporated AA and NA. As I said, just the first 3 steps.
Right, so one of the things that we want to make sure that you differentiate is that the TC process is different and separate and apart from AA and NA. AA and NA should be used. It's a recovery support. It's part of ongoing maintenance. It's part of a long journey through long-term recovery, right? But it's not a substitute also for the TC process. And we also are saying that in the TC process that people learn through challenge and action, right? That does not occur in AA and NA.
We're not doing a comparison. We're telling you what the differences are, and we're also telling you how the similarities are, and the crossover, and how you should be able to use both tools.
You know, you have to have a specific individual guideline for your center, and you have to follow that on a consistent basis in terms of how those issues are handled. You must, in a TC program, maintain a drug-free environment. You want to have, you know, typically you will have, sometimes they're called cardinal rules or some other 1 or 2 or 3 rules of the program that are sacrosanct. Those cannot be violated, right? In our program, there are 3. All right, 1 is you can't have any violence or threat of violence. 2 is that you can have no drugs on the premises ever, right? And 3 is that you can have no sexual relations among participants, all right? And those 3 have to be maintained in order for participants to have the physical and psychological safety that's required. From there, you have to have your own policy-making ability to try to determine, okay, say if you have an outpatient center and somebody has a relapse after a prolonged period of abstinence and comes and tells you, I had this, but I'm already back on track, versus somebody introducing drugs and using them in the bathroom of your facility and bringing 6 other people to use them with you. I mean, there's 2 different scenarios, right? One can be, you can look at it and say, okay, the person has taken personal responsibility and accountability and expressed a willingness to change. And the other is a repeat of behavior which is contrary to the TC, right? Dishonesty, deception, and other negative things. And you have to treat that in a different fashion, right? So there's no absolute. Like, we cannot sit here, Dr. Taylor and I, and say, okay, when this happens, this is your response. Now, we can give you general guidelines that you should have some ideas for, well, this is the way that you can help people's behavior and attitude along a continuum of change. And if there are difficulties, you can provide sanctions. If there are positive things, you provide rewards. And we're going to give you some guidance on that. Ultimately, that would be for something for you and your center to try to determine how those issues are handled and how pervasive they are.
It depends on your program. Obviously, a relapse has to be taken a look at the circumstances. What triggered it? Why? Under what circumstances? What lessons need to be learned that haven't been learned the first time? Those are some of the clinical issues and behavioral issues as well. Plus, the fact is that if somebody has relapsed and they've come back to you, they're really asking you for help. That's a positive sign. I mean, there are those who relapse and they're gone into the sunset. You never see them again. So if they come knocking on your door again, that means they still have hope that they can change, and they have hope that you can help them change. So you really want to make sure that you don't judge the relapse without judging the motivation of the person coming back to see you. That's really, really critical. For us, the only thing we talk about in terms of greater power is the power of the group, the power of the community. And the community, as Seep has described eloquently, is everybody who works in that program or contributes to that environment. And we talked earlier that the contributions can also come from people who are acting as chefs or gardeners or, counselors. So it's not the hierarchy of the position, but the fact that they make a contribution to the community. In terms of God, you're talking about God and spirituality?
Yeah. Step 2 and 3. Higher
We
power.
leave that to the individual to ascertain. Yes, we believe that. If you take a look at most of the literature, the literature says that addiction is a disorder that has biological, physiological, biopsychosocial, spiritual disorder. Now, some people have suggested that the spiritual piece of it be left. Some people say the spiritual piece should stay in terms of the definition. As far as we're concerned, we think the introduction to spirituality has to be on an individual basis, and it has to deal with a person's belief system. So that's how we like to handle that. We think that spirituality is an important aspect of one's personal growth and development, but it should not be something that is proscribed. It is something that is left to each individual. And that is the safest way we can say. Although I must say Carl Jung, was known for his very snappy quotation when he said to the patient that he was seeing, he said, "Your problem of spirits will require a spiritual solution." Okay, that was the phrase that Carl Jung used. So when you think about that, part of people really being introspective and working on their problems and their deficits and their character flaws, and as they try to improve themselves, there is a conversion that takes place. Do we call it spiritual? Do we call it consciousness raising? Do we call it awareness training? Call it whatever you like, but there is a process. And for folks to believe that there is a future without drugs and alcohol, there is a blind faith here, is there not? So, is it spiritual? Is it consciousness? Is it believing in God? I leave that to the individual. So thank you, Dr. Kumar, for trusting us, for believing in us, and for inviting us, and also for making us feel so very welcome. I hope that you will eagerly participate in not only the training modules, I hope that they will be useful to you in the work that you do, and please give us feedback to see how well you feel that the training has been for your particular work. Thank you so much.